shenanigans. I call absolute shenanigans.
I think if you are a Republican looking at this climate, you are heading for the hills.
Does your wife know that you watch 10 minutes of televised fellatio of the president every morning?
We're teaching the world that freedom is negotiable. As a Republican, as an American, we should all be upset by that.
Welcome to Political Rehab, smart politics without the hangover. I'm Matt.
And I'm Matt.
Today, a White House pep rally, a lot of cracked and forced smiles in Washington, a huge bipartisan win. The White House seems determined to avoid a DEI witch hunt and the end of news media, ? But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. It's time for the Trump dump, our weekly segment where we get it all out of our system right up front so we can have a great show, because it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent. There's something Donald Trump did this week that pissed you off.
And look, it's not news that Donald Trump is a lowlife who lacks empathy for other human beings or the capacity to understand that anything that doesn't directly affect him matters. But this exchange in the fascinating new profile of Marjorie Taylor Greene from the New York Times' Robert Draper is still eye-opening, or it should be, and I hope we never lose the capacity to find this revolting. It describes Marjorie Taylor Greene's last exchange with the president by text message on November 16th of this year. She had just received an anonymous email in her personal Gmail account that threatened the life of her college-aged son. It said, "Derek will have his life snuffed out soon. Better watch his back." The email's subject heading used the nickname Trump had given her the day before, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Greene promptly texted that information to the president. According to a source familiar with the exchange, his long reply made no mention of her son. Instead, Trump insulted her in personal terms. When she replied that children should remain off limits from their disagreements, Trump responded that she had only herself to blame. In response to detailed questions and a request for comment, a White House spokesman wrote, "President Trump remains the undisputed leader of the greatest and fastest growing political movement in American history, the MAGA movement. On the other hand, Congresswoman Greene is quitting on her constituents in the middle of her term and abandoning the consequential fight we're in. We don't have time for her petty bitterness." In other words, that's a non-denial denial. They can't say it didn't happen because obviously MTG has the receipts, so they're just resorting to doubling down on insulting her and victim blaming. They're literally telling this woman, "You were asking for it." Look, say what you will about J.D. Vance, but the man has the basic kindergarten level of social grace and dignity to hear about an incident involving Tim Walz's son and say, "I'm sorry that happened." If you happen to be a Trump supporter, I want to ask, if your kids behaved like this, would you be horrified? Would you be embarrassed? If the answer is yes, then please just consider that maybe it's time to finally say enough is enough with this person who doesn't care about you and wouldn't care if something happened to your children unless it affected him personally. And if the answer is no, then please just consider whether maybe politics has done something to your values and your basic humanity that you don't like. The good news is, either way, we don't have to tolerate this. We don't have to put up with this from the people that we raise up to power. We can demand more, and in 2026, I hope we will.
Wow. Very good. My Trump dump this week is also about MAGA, but it's the absolute nonsense they spew on autopilot. Let me give you an example. Last week in my column, which you can read in the Charlotte Observer on my Substack, I wrote that Donald Trump is morphing into Joe Biden. The point wasn't just age, though, yeah, that matters. Biden was 79 in December of 2021, and Trump is now 79, and Trump is falling asleep in meetings so often that Saturday Night Live is even making jokes about it. Even the messaging feels recycled. Trump is running the same Biden-era gaslighting on the economy, the same "don't believe your eyes" routine that wrecked Democrats in 2024. So what did MAGA come back with? Matt, we all know you have Trump derangement syndrome. Look, I love reading comments. I spent decades in politics. I run on caffeine, criticism, chaos. I feed off negativity. Tell me I'm wrong. I don't care. But I admit, I was a little disappointed. I figured that pointing out that America has now suffered through two aging presidents, both surrounded by questions about stamina and judgment, might get me more than just a bumper sticker insult. get some better talking points, have an opinion, and for God's sake, stand by some principles. Let me give you another example. There is no way a true conservative can defend Trump's anti-free market protectionist crusade. And don't come back with one good quarter of 4.3% economic growth. That's fantastic news, and it should be celebrated. But it doesn't prove Trump's tariffs work any more than Biden's 4 quarters over 4%, including 2 of them that were over 7% that proved his economy was healthy. He still left behind record debt, rising interest rates, and families crushed by high prices. And that brings me back to what Trump derangement syndrome really is. It isn't criticizing him. It's watching people abandon every conservative principle they ever claimed to believe in just to defend it. And there's another word for that. It's called a cult.
I love the way you've twisted TDS back on its originators and redefined it. That's absolutely spectacular. With that, let's get to this week's rundown. Benjamin Netanyahu meets Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago as regional offensive fears rise. Yes, it was a summit, or if we're in the upside down, a trench. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with our U.S. President Donald Trump to discuss the next phase of Gaza ceasefire arrangements. The terms for the initial phase of the ceasefire that Donald Trump helped to broker back in October have been largely completed. Israel's forces have pulled back to new positions. Hamas has now released all living and all but one of the dead hostages, but immense challenges remain facing the implementation of the second phase of the 20-point ceasefire plan that was supposed to lead to a permanent ceasefire and perhaps a peace. Trump has said that he hopes to reach that phase 2 of the plan very quickly. There are fears that Israel is about to launch new offensives against Hezbollah in Lebanon and against Iran. Meanwhile, there are street riots in Tehran over inflation happening there. Matt, anything good coming out of this?
It feels like our healthcare plan. We're going to have a proposal sometime in the future, and kind of wait and see. Look, we always look at Israel as an ally. They're a friend, but really this kind of felt like this was just part of Trump's Spotify playlist, like a reminder that we had a peace deal sometime earlier this year. It was more pomp and circumstance. It was more, let's get together. Netanyahu wants to talk about an award he wants to give Trump. This really felt like a pep rally to me more than it did anything else that was any real substance. The hardest 10% is still left. Even Mike Pompeo said this is going to be difficult. I just don't see this happening anytime soon.
What bothered me was that Trump said Netanyahu had done a phenomenal job. It reminds me of "You're doing a heck of a job, Brownie" from 20 years ago. That's a deep cut for political obsessives.
Yeah.
He says Israel wouldn't exist without Netanyahu. He also claimed that he had spoken to the president of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog, who said a pardon for Netanyahu in his long-running corruption trial was on the way. That sounds like more Trump bullshit, right? Oh, in 2 weeks, this is going to happen. He went on to say he's a wartime prime minister who's a hero. How do you not give a pardon? I can list a number of ways how, although I will say that if there were a serious approach to trying to actually convert this into a long-term peace, it probably would involve pardoning Netanyahu and just moving on.
It feels a lot like Ukraine. And both are democracies, both were attacked, and they're both very different approaches. And so when Zelensky was at Mar-a-Lago this week with some peace talks, it was a very different feel. There is progress there, but it really doesn't feel like we're getting there. Ukraine is not just another country, it's a democracy under attack. So I guess the question here is, Matt, what do you make of this?
This reminds me of the old math problem. If you keep getting 90% of the way closer to a wall, when do you get there? And the answer is never. Donald Trump has claimed multiple times, including this week coming out of this meeting, that they're 90% of the way, or 95% of the way in this case, toward an agreement. Shenanigans. I call absolute shenanigans. It gives me no pleasure to do this. All of us who are sane badly want a peace in Ukraine that stops the attacks, the killing from Russia. But make no mistake, unlike the situation between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, where there is some legitimate credit to give Donald Trump and his team for the ceasefire there. He had a positive role to play. It's the exact opposite in Ukraine. There was a deep dive report in the New York Times this week going through the history of how we ended up in this vicious cycle doom loop in Ukraine. And the answer is basically Trump withholding critical munitions. A senior official is quoted as saying, "This happened so many times I've lost count. This is literally killing them. Death by 1,000 cuts. We'll offer something, we'll withdraw it." If you're Vladimir Putin, you have every incentive to keep prolonging this, keep up the pain and the killing and the war, because American support could collapse at any moment. So the mere fact that Trump is so weak and so under the thumb of Russia on this, weakness is provocative, it's provoking the ongoing war. This is an absolute fail that is at Donald Trump's doorstep.
I think it's clear Putin is not interested in peace. And I think the sad thing here is if America helps pressure a democracy into surrendering to a dictator, we're not making peace. We're teaching the world that freedom is negotiable. As a Republican, as an American, we should all be upset by that.
I want to talk about a story that emerged this week in the Honolulu Civil Beat of all news sources, highlighting how Donald Trump's second term is reshaping United States science policy. The National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health have distributed over 20% less in grants. What we're seeing in this year-end review is an all-out assault on science and scientific research investment. Matt, big win, huh? Just we're getting tired of winning here in America.
Look, we should force agencies to justify what they fund. And I believe cutting waste and ending woke nonsense in science is probably a good thing. And as a strategist, this is a political goldmine for us. It's easy to say, look at this. The Democrat wants to fund this, and this is what your tax dollars are going to do. And it's an easy win. It's easy for us to raise money on it. But blowing up the system to try to save money to score some political points when we're potentially endangering the health of us.
Funding science is the single most successful thing that the American government does or has ever done. I wrote about this at the beginning of 2025 in Newsweek. It's something that I've been studying. It was part of my graduate work at the Kennedy School of Government. And let me just suffice it to say, everything in the modern world around us is the grandchild of US government taxpayer-funded scientific research. Camera phones, CAT scans, LED lights, sneakers, communication satellites, batteries, lasers, Google, GPS, solar panels, robots, the internet. It all comes from taxpayer-funded science. And this is the perfect opportunity for public-private partnership. This is an area where Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree. About a third of US patents in the private sector rely on federal research. The federal government does the long-term basic research, and then the private sector comes in and takes advantage of it and makes trillions of dollars that we spread around the world and comes back to us. What you said is exactly right and part of the problem here. Of course, the federal government funds things that sound kind of funny, right? We study shrimp on treadmills and whether pigs can breathe through their butts. It turns out that the shrimp study is being used to improve military body armor, and the butt breathing study could help veterans with respiratory failure or compromised airways. And famously, Ozempic came from a study of Gila monster spit. And so this is an absolute insane self-own from the Trump administration. And it's just a squandered opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to do something absolutely great together.
There was a report that the DOJ is using an old fraud law in a brand new way. The Department of Justice launched an investigation into corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs under the False Claims Act, anti-fraud statute of financial fraud. And they've already sort of targeted companies like Google and Verizon under investigation. To me, this sort of wondering, are they really fighting fraud or are they staging a culture war showdown? What do you think, Matt?
This comes from a great report in the Wall Street Journal. And look, I break from what might seem to stereotypically be the political orthodoxy of the Democratic Party on this. I happen to agree that over the last 5 years, A certain amount of wokeism got out of control. I'm not alone in that view. For example, Professor Randall Kennedy made a splash last year, writing an op-ed in the Harvard Crimson. He's an eminent scholar of race and civil rights, saying, look, I'm a scholar on the left who's committed to struggles for social justice. The reality surrounding mandatory DEI statements, however, make me wince. There's also a stack of evidence that DEI trainings are absolutely useless on the corporate level. They do not advance diversity, equity, or inclusion. They're essentially an industry that exploded in 2020 and 2021 as corporate entities and institutions tried to kind of get themselves right with the new political orthodoxy. This is the kind of thing that comes from a genuine place of people wanting to have more diversity, wanting to not be racist dicks to one another. That's, of course, a wonderful and important thing. And there's a proud tradition of using federal government power to fight racism, fight discrimination. But what we're talking about in that situation is upholding the law, upholding the Constitution, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race. This is a case of a mafia tactic of getting companies to go along with your political agenda by distorting a law. And it's obviously another Trump mess.
Look, DEI deserves scrutiny, but this tool is dangerous. This sets a precedent Republicans may regret. If a conservative DOJ can use fraud laws to punish DEI, a future Democrat DOJ could use the same tools to punish companies for climate policies, gun policies, donations. This is weaponized regulation that I think Republicans are going to come to regret. And I think the way we're using justice is going to cause more long-term problems than we are even thinking about right now.
So I have a question for you. Is the media dead? If they did have a death notice, you wouldn't read about it in the newspaper because newspapers are gone. We've had the high-profile incident of 60 Minutes spiking the report on CCOT last week, and news broke in the last week of the tally of media job losses over the last year, 2,200 job cuts to date in digital and print media over the course of the year, driven by restructuring, industry consolidation, and of course, Trump's cuts to PBS. That is the media dead?
It's a slow death right now. Fear is starting to replace editorial courage. And on one side, we're seeing it just completely collapse. Some of it's just bad business practice. This has been a long, slow moving process. We need a good independent media. We need that as part of checks and balances. But not only are we seeing it with the 60-minute segment, I noticed, and I know this is not a program you watch a lot, but I was watching Fox and Friends the other morning. And I'm sure you wake up and drink your coffee and watch Fox and Friends. But it was 10 minutes about how wonderful Donald Trump is. And his optimism, his love for America is so great, that is so infectious, and that the golden age of America is just coming, and it's all because of him and how lucky we are to have him. It felt like state-run media. So it's
Matt,
not,
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Does your wife know that you watch 10 minutes of televised fellatio of the president every morning?
She's not awake yet. Let's be honest. I do it in the secret, in the dark. Nobody really knows.
Right, as one does.
As one does. Yeah, nobody owns up to watching Fox and Friends. It is so bad, so state-run, that we've lost critical thinking. And as a result, the media is collapsing around us.
The media is not dead, but the function of providing an independent, verified, credible, trusted source of information is rapidly dying. Part of it is the local news desert because we don't have local newspapers anymore. But look, when you've got a situation where corporate media is afraid of Brendan Carr and Donald Trump, that's no different than state-owned media in the Soviet Union. The migration of everything to short form video or AI summaries is also terrible for our capacity to do critical thinking. And look at this show. We are like a Flintstones multivitamin. We're trying to pack actual factual information and informed analysis inside a package that's pretty sweet so people will actually eat it.
Excellent point. That's why you got to watch our show.
Let's get to a brand New Year's Eve appropriate segment of political predictions that are sure to go wrong for 2026.
New prediction.
What will Trump's net approval rating be on June 1st, 2026?
As of today, his net approval rating, that's disapproval versus approval is negative. It's negative 12.2. His low point in the second term was negative 15. I think, given the cratering economy, the regular cloud of chaos around Donald Trump, ongoing erosion within MAGA, 1 in 7 Trump voters from 2024 already regret their vote. I predict that is going to be a net approval rating of negative 20.
I have a slightly different take because the question is June 1st. We're leading into the 250th year. I think there's a lot of pomp and circumstance happening during the summer. It's still going to be underwater. I think we're probably sitting at negative 10. It's still not good.
All right, next up. Will Democrats or Republicans win the House in 2026, and by how many seats? Matt?
It will be a butt kicking like you've never seen in your lifetime. The Democrats are going to almost wipe us off the board, other than all the really safe seats. I think we are going to lose in 2026 40 seats.
40 seats. Okay.
40
I love it.
seats.
We're disagreeing. All right. Now, look, you said there would be no math on this exam, but I'm going to do some math. All right. Here we go. As of today, Republicans hold 220 seats. Democrats hold 213. Historically, the president's party loses on average about 25 to 30 seats in a midterm. You could look at solid, likely, or leaning Democratic seats. That gets you to 208. There are 17 toss-up seats. So let's say Democrats win 15 of those. And then they win half of the 8 seats that are leaning toward Republicans. That gets you to 227 Democratic seats, or a pickup of only 14 seats. I'm going to go with 14.
Wow, that's low. That is low, but we are going to see, because again, one of us will be right or wrong. Will there be a new record for House retirements this year?
The record was 48 members of the U.S. House of Representatives who chose to voluntarily leave their seats by retiring, resigning, or running for another office. 48 in the 1994 election cycle, the historic 94 midterm collapse of the Democratic Party. I was going to say no, but I have reversed myself to yes, we are going to set a new record, because as of today, NPR's Congressional Retirement Tracker says there are already 45 House members who are retiring. Therefore, you only need 3 more to tie the record. 4 to break it. We're going to break it, Matt.
100% going to break it. I think the writing is on the wall. I think if you are a Republican looking at this climate, you are heading for the hills. You're pulling a Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're getting out while you can. I'm hearing even some solid Republicans who might be running for bigger offices are going to retire coming in the next month or two. Same reason. I think we're going to break the record.
Do you hear one of the best lines of the year when Senator Joni Ernst retired and she said she was doing it to spend more time with her family? And then the response was she didn't specify which lobbying firm that was. All right. Will the Supreme Court of the United States strike down Donald Trump's tariffs?
100%. People continue to look at the Supreme Court and say it's a conservative court, it's going to side with Trump. I think this court is a constitutional court. And I think you're going to look at the powers and what the president can do. And I think they're going to strike down tariffs.
First of all, I disagree with your assessment of them as a constitutional court. I'm going to cheat this and I'm going to say, yes, they're going to find a way to overturn the tariffs based on the authority that Trump has claimed, based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which says absolutely nothing about tariffs. If there's any strict constructionist left in the Supreme Court, if there ever were any, they should be barfing all over this. But I think they're going to find a way to say, no, you can't do that, but they're going to keep it super narrow. So the very next day, he's just going to slap the tariffs back on, asserting some other kind of insane authority that he doesn't actually have. So it'll kind of a split decision.
All right. Will the U.S. avoid a government shutdown in 2026?
No, the U.S. will not avoid a government shutdown in 2026. People respond to incentives. There are incentives for both parties to try to play for political advantage by having another government shutdown before the midterms.
Yes, there will 100% be a government shutdown in 2026. I think my question, and I'm going to get back to you, how many government shutdowns in 2026? Will there be 2?
Only one, but it's going to suck.
Oh, see, I think we have one coming up in February, and I think we're going to have another longer one right before the midterms, because you're right. There's a lot of jockeying going on, and I think it's going to be used as a political poison pill somewhere along the way on both sides. And I can see one partial shutdown at the beginning of the year and another one that's going to come at the end.
The only thing I'll say is that after the midterms, if we're in a situation where there's a more divided government, there's going to be an incentive for Republicans to try to make a deal before Democrats have a hold on power. They're going to feel like they have the most leverage before the changeover. I think it's less likely after the midterms, but still possible. All right, what will the Senate split be after the midterms?
I think Democrats will get control of the Senate. I think it's going to be a narrow, they will hold with independents. They will hold 51-49. It will be narrow.
Wow.
They'll pick it up. But here's my question after you get done with your prediction. When they do it, is Chuck Schumer going to be majority leader?
I'll take the last part first. No, he will not. There are candidates who have made it central to their platform that they will not support him for majority leader. He will see the writing on the wall and he will ride off into the sunset before it's a political ousting. I think they're going to come up just short. I think Democrats will finally beat Susan Collins in Maine. I think they'll hold the open seat in Michigan. I think they will hold John Ossoff in Georgia. And I think they will win in your backyard, close to it, in North Carolina. After holding New Hampshire, I think they're going to come up short in Ohio. I think Ohio is too far gone to the Republican Party. That will leave them at 49 seats, just short of a majority. Who will be the first to go in the Trump administration, and will it occur in 2026?
I think it's Pam Bondi. I think Pam Bondi goes in 2026. I think she's completely messed up the Epstein files. The MAGA base, the hardcore MAGA base, the same people at the beginning of this show that criticized me for Trump derangement syndrome, that group of people are angry at what's happening. They don't see a real solution. She seems to be incompetent. I think Bondi goes middle of this year.
I think Hegseth is the first to go. The knives are out inside the administration. They just don't want the chaos. They just don't want the optics. The advantage they have with Pam Bondi is they have such a deep financial hold. She owes her entire financial profile. Like literally, her accountant essentially works for Donald Trump. Everything about her career and her personal finances and her future prospects is tied to Donald Trump. They have total possession of her and everything she does. Hegseth, I think he's a lot more expendable, but it's not going to happen in 26. I think Susie Wiles gets her way on that.
So there are a couple socialist mayors that are taking office this year, most notably in New York City. Will there be a success story with them? What is it going to look like at the end of 2026 for socialism and your party?
I think there's going to be a New York Times headline talking about how Mamdani and other socialist mayors have come face to face with the harsh reality. I sound like Almost Famous here. They're a mid-level band struggling in the harsh light of stardom. This is the audacity of math. Zohran Mamdani knows he can't do free buses, freeze the rent, $30 an hour minimum wage, city-run grocery stores. There is not the money for all of this. He's going to try to get caught trying. And there's no way that all of this is going to survive first contact with the enemy.
What I find interesting about this is he's kind of a mini Trump. Make a lot of promises, but he's going to spend a lot of time blaming Kathy Hochul. He's going to spend a lot of time saying there was some force out there that prevented him, some deep state that's going to prevent him from doing it. But I think at the end of the day, at the end of 2026, he's going to have just enough success to cause you headaches going forward, where I think the Democrats are going to have to reckon a lot more with this wing of the party that has just enough there to kind of keep bringing in people that kind of causes some of your candidates to have to push further to the left than they'd want to. Okay, so give me one prediction, just your boldest prediction that is sure to go wrong, just anything out of the blue. What do you got?
I'm going to give you two, and I'm going to apply my wife's favorite phrase of making an anti-jinx, where you say something out loud that you want to manifest in reality, sort of spiking the jinx. Does this make any sense? So my actual bold prediction is that George Santos is going to land a high-profile job in the Trump administration. I'm going to go with, I don't know, something, a special ambassador or something. The one that's close to my heart where I'm anti-jinxing is that the U.S. men's national team will make it to the semifinals of the upcoming 2026 World Cup.
Fantastic. Here's mine, and this is sure to drive Democrats just batshit crazy. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be a full-time analyst on CNN. I think she is going to be out there. She's going to take Scott Jennings' place. She's going to get on there, and every day you're going to watch her spew everything that CNN viewers hate, but she's become the media darling. She's going out there rebranding herself. She's getting herself set up for something. It's sure to be another high-paying job for her. I expect to see Marjorie Taylor Greene on CNN this year. I'm looking forward to it. It will make the program much, much better.
This is a great prediction. This is very likely. It drives eyeballs. She has enough things to say now that appeal to Democrats and enough to enrage Democrats and make them hate watch. This is spot on. This is definitely happening. All right. That is it for our political predictions for 2026. Sure to go wrong. And with that, let's get to our weekly segment. That's bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
A bullshit?
This is not a video about the Epstein files. Not really. What it's really about is our government's ability to distort, invent, and lie. But let's look at that through the lens of the Trump Department of Justice's explanation of the status of the Epstein files, which has changed about as often as a baby's diaper and for the same reason. And a big hat tip to the Substacker Shane Almgren, author of the Trumpland Diary, for preparing this timeline. In February, Pam Bondi notoriously said this:
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients?
It's sitting on my desk right now.
In March, the DOJ said there are no Epstein files. In April, they updated to say that a team of lawyers are combing through all the non-existent Epstein files. In July, Pam Bondi issued a further clarification.
There was no client list.
By August, it was, we're going to release all of the files by next month. And in September, it was, no, we're not going to release them because there's nothing in them. And Trump added that they're all a Democratic Party hoax, which also exonerates him, which is why we're not releasing them. But then after Congress forced them to release the files in November, the Department of Justice said, we're going to release them on December 19th. And then on December 19th, it was, we couldn't release all of them because there are too many. And those hundreds of lawyers who started looking back in April are really too busy. But to be clear, there are files and we're going to release them. And then the very next day, they released a few documents with almost everything blacked out. And then on Christmas Eve, they announced that they had discovered 1 million more pages of Epstein files that were stored over there. So we didn't know about them. Of course, as we all expected would be the case, this happened.
The new release also includes documents that mention President Trump. Trump was a passenger on at least 8 flights between 1993 and 1996 on Epstein's jet.
But still, all the stonewalling led to this.
Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna and Republican Congressman Thomas Massie announced late last night that they will bring inherent contempt charges against Attorney General Pam Bondi and the DOJ's failure to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act.
But again, my point here isn't to talk about the Epstein files or the horrible crimes that he and his associates committed. It's worth a much deeper examination at another time. What the Trump administration is doing really goes far beyond bullshit. It speaks to their deep down belief that questions from the public and our legally elected representatives in a co-equal branch of government are the kind of nuisance you might get from a 3-year-old that you can deflect with a throwaway line. And why not? Because it's not like they can hold you accountable. Which is why we've landed at the perfect ending to this timeline, a charge from a Republican and a Democrat of inherent contempt. That's a legal term, but it's also the perfect description for the way these jackals think about the American citizens who put them in power. This timeline is their way of saying, we have inherent contempt for you. And that goes far, far beyond mere bullshit.
All right. Hey, fantastic. Love that timeline. Another great piece. Always love these things.
Thank you. Once again, the world supplies. What is it? Trenton makes, the world takes. The world makes, we take. All right. With that, let's start off the new year with a little dose of hope.
There was a story on Drudge that said Republicans have a Vance problem. No one seems to like him. Now, that's kind of obvious to, I think, most of us. But at the end of 2025, it's starting to feel like MAGA has been exposed as the fraud that it is. Republicans at the grassroots level are starting to rise up and reclaim the mantle of Ronald Reagan, where principles mattered and whose conservatism stood for enduring values. You see that spirit alive in groups like Our Republican Legacy, a coalition of principled Republicans working to reclaim the party from within. You see it with groups like Freedom Conservatives, who believe that in order to ensure that America's best days are ahead, we must apply the timeless principles of liberty to the challenges of the 21st century. You also see it with Mike Pence, who was in the news last week, who's reemerged as a more traditional Reaganite conservative, seeking to resist Trump's populist redefinition of the movement and the broader Republican Party. You even had a bunch of Heritage Foundation staffers defect and go over to Pence's DC-based advocacy organization advancing American freedom. And what these groups all have in common is that they're dedicated to having a functioning Republican Party, one big enough to welcome everyone who believes in freedom, opportunity, and the promise of America. My dose of hope is that we are on the verge of a stronger party. And those voices are getting louder, and I think we'll only see it get bigger in 2026.
Well, my dose of hope is related and a bookend to my Trump dump of the week, the remarkable interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene in the New York Times. It shows overall how Marjorie Taylor Greene is coming to terms slowly with the last 5 years and the role that she's played in American politics. And it contains some absolute barn burner quotes. One is, after Charlie Kirk died, I realized that I'm part of this toxic culture. I really started to look at my faith. I wanted to be more like Christ. Another about Donald Trump is, he has trash talked so many people. I promise you, I don't hold myself up as more special than others. He's done this too. I get it. This is Trump. This is what he does. And finally, referring to MAGA people, for the love of God, what the fuck is the matter with these people? Now, look, for those out there, including many of my Republican friends who tell me this privately, they've heard enough about Marjorie Taylor Greene. They don't want to think about her. They don't want to engage any further. I understand. I get it. I still think there's something interesting happening here, much like you said, Matt, and it's worth thinking about and knowing about. Sure, for MTG, this process may have started as a reaction to being snubbed by Trump for the Georgia Senate race. It doesn't matter. As you read through these quotes in this interview, it becomes clear that this is someone who swallowed the red pill. She's seeing more and more just what an illusion. She's trapped her own mind inside. She's seeing things that have been evident to the rest of us for a long time. Trump's pathological narcissism, his complete corruption, his total lack of empathy, the fact that he doesn't really believe anything he says for the benefit of his voters. Regardless of what kicked it off, she's on the way out. And is it perfect? Heck no. She still believes some things that I deeply disagree with. But how can you not want to encourage growth and change and breaking free of something so obviously toxic for America? If it's happening for her, how can you not want to encourage it for her so that others will similarly feel encouraged? All of this means that there's hope, that this is the harbinger of a lot more of this to come for a lot more people. If you can reach the end of this road, hit the other side, ask for some forgiveness, try to make sense of it all, try to move forward without the worst of what you became, that's progress. That means there is a cure for the MAGA mind virus. This is how cults die out. When people begin to question, begin to break, and begin to show others that there's life after the cult. So I wish Marjorie Taylor Greene well in this journey. I believe and I hope that it's the sign of things to come.
Excellent. Great one. I love that.
You should love it because it's very similar to and I love hearing my own opinions parroted back by you. Speaking of which, that is all for Political Rehab. We hope everyone out there feels rehabbed and feels ready to launch into a wonderful 2026. For Matt, I'm Matt. See you next time.